The idea that I'd like to talk about today is the idea of the double bluff, which is a very easy and straightforward idea to grasp. But before I start on it, I'd just like to talk a little bit about uncertainty. And uncertainty is a key thing. It's a key thing whether we're talking about psychology or cosmology or physics, whatever we're talking about. Uncertainty is always key. It can never be eliminated. It's always there. And not only is it always there, it's always key. It's always crucial. I.e., it comes before everything else. It is primary to everything else. Everything comes out of it. Kind of like saying it's the universal source. Everything else is a provisional development of uncertainty, which means that everything actually is uncertainty, even the things that we're very certain about. It's just that we have done a kind of mental maneuver where we have ignored the uncertain origins of our certainty. So we can talk about mental health in terms of how good we are at relating to uncertainty. Although maybe good's not quite the right word. It's not like a skill or a talent. So what I could say instead, it's mental health is a measure of our willingness to relate to uncertainty, because that's all it takes is for us not to be averse to it, not to be wanting to resist it or run away from it, or fool ourselves so we don't have to see it. So the more willing we are to relate directly to uncertainty, the more mentally healthy we are. And that's really just another way of saying the less deluded we are, because it follows that if we are averse to relating to the intrinsic uncertainty of everything, then we're going to have to live in a made-up world, a delusory world, a world in which there is no radical or profound uncertainty. Now, it stands to reason that starting from the point where we are averse to relating to uncertainty, which leads straight onto the fact that we're going to live in a different type of a world, a made-up or deluded, hallucinatory world in which things are certain and there's no radical uncertainty. That isn't a healthy situation, and we don't even need to argue that, obviously, because when we're living in an unreal, fabricated reality because we're scared of the real reality, we know that's not a healthy state of affairs. So that's the first point we can make. And the second point we could make, if we wanted to, is to say that almost every one of us is profoundly averse to relating to radical uncertainty. And as a consequence, every one of us is living in a fabricated, made-up, hallucinatory world, in which things are perfectly certain and sure, and we can rely on them, we can lean on them, and they will support our weight. Only they won't really. Not when it really comes down to it, because we can't really lean on the mind-created certainties because they're not really there, so we can't really lean on them. And on some level or other, we always know this. And no matter how relaxed or cocky we might seem, underlying this is profound insecurity that can never be gotten rid of. And this idea isn't a particularly new idea. In fact, it's not new at all. It's what existential psychologists have been saying. It's what Buddhists have been saying, that the core of everything is uncertain, and we are running away from that uncertainty. And when we read about what Chogyam Trungpa says, it's not just that we're averse to it. That's kind of putting it too mildly. We're terrified out of our wits, absolutely terrified. And this terror is so great. It's the greatest terror there is. It's the grandfather or grandmother of all terror. It is the terror, the archetypal terror, the terror behind everything, the terror behind our need to create a world of apparently solid and permanent things. It's this terror is like the clock string that drives our entire lives, and that usually is something that people aren't going to see as being true because we're not aware of the terror. But the reason we're not aware of it is because it is the archetypal terror, and because it is the archetypal terror that has caused us to initiate a tremendous escape procedure, policy, escape maneuver. That is, our need to escape is so great that we've completely blocked it out, in other words, which is probably a much simpler way of putting it. What we're talking about is just denial. So when I'm in denial of something, I know nothing about it. And if you talk to me about it, I'm going to look honestly baffled. I don't know what you're talking about. Sorry, I don't know what you're talking about. I really don't. And that is true, I don't. The reason I don't is because I'm in denial. And the reason I'm in denial is because I'm so averse to being aware of whatever it is I don't want to be aware of. So the mere fact that I'm not aware of it doesn't prove anything, really. Once we bring to mind the actual nature of denial. Just a few more words on uncertainty, because we can talk about existential psychotherapy or existential philosophy, and we can talk about Buddhist metaphysics, and that's all very well, but people can say, but yeah, that stuff's just kind of made up stuff, whatever. It's not hard science. And the hard science is exactly the same, though, because if we're really interested in hard science, genuinely, then we'd have to come to terms with the fact that there's no such thing as matter, there's no such thing as solidity or substantiality, there's no substantial elements in reality at all. And the foundation of all our idea of things being substantial or solid or reliable or tangible comes down very simply to this idea of locality. And locality means that things are here but they're not there. So it's like if there's a big checkerboard or a chessboard, and if the piece is in one square, that's its location. And the very fact that the piece is in one square means it's not in any other square. So locality is really a manifestation of Aristotelian logic. If it's this, then it can't be anything else. So there's a principle of exclusivity there, or as Aristotle put it there, the law or principle of the excluded middle. Either it's one or the other. If it's there, then it can't be anywhere else. So things are kind of pinned down in that way. And the fact that they're pinned down in that way is what gives us our security. We like for them to be pinned down. We know where things are. They're always going to be there. We can turn around and they're still there, and I can predict that they're going to be there. And that's psychological security or ontological security. And that's fine, because we all understand that. So I'm sitting here in this car, and by definition I'm not in any other car, and I'm not anywhere else. I'm here. So here is locality, and that's all very well in everyday life. But if we're interested in going deeply into things and looking at the physics of things, we discover that there aren't any things, because things rely on locality. And when we really fine-tune into the nature of the physical universe, we see that nothing can be located, that actually location is a fiction that works on the macroscopic scale. But when we really look into it, things don't abide by these rules. They don't play this game. They don't play by the rules of the game. They're kind of laughing at us, really, because there is no such thing as locality when we really, really look into it. Locality is like a framework we impose on the world, and it's a handy framework. It allows us to create positive knowledge. It allows us to talk about things. But what we're imposing this framework on, the ultimate nature of everything is non-local. The source of the physical universe is non-local. It didn't come from here, it didn't come from there. And saying that it's non-local means that it doesn't exist within the space-time continuum, because any time, if it's here in this present moment and not a million years in the future or a million years in the past, that's a location. But the whole business of the space-time continuum popped into existence as a type of quantum fluctuation, as a lot of physicists would say, and until it popped into existence, there was no space and there was no time. So we can't talk about, well, when did the universe come into existence, or when did the space-time continuum come into existence? Because this when is what came into existence. The whole framework of now and later and when and here and not there, all of that came out into existence. The whole framework came into existence, which allows us to ask questions within the terms of the framework, which isn't primary anyway, because the non-locality, or the state of original symmetry, which there is no here and there, up and down, yes or no, because primary nature of reality is not within the space-time continuum, which is another way of saying that it's timeless and spaceless. And that kind of is another way of talking about eternity. Eternity is a word that's used in spiritual, metaphysical, mystical terms. And eternity doesn't mean forever and ever and ever, amen. It just means that there's no time. It's the eternal now. There's no time, there's no framework. But anyway, I didn't really mean to spend so much time talking about that, because I'm kind of confusing myself. But the point is that we don't like relating to that, because it's so very perplexing, and we have to drop this way of looking at the world that gives us reassurance and allows us to believe that there is a framework that we can adapt to. So this discussion does allow us to talk about the double bluff. So it is going somewhere. The double bluff. Well, a bluff is where I put on a very, very good show that I am what I'm not. Such a good show that everyone falls for it. That's a bluff. Because it's a bluff, because it's not really true. Obviously, if it was true, it wouldn't be a bluff. It'd just be a statement of fact. So that's that. We know about bluffs. A double bluff is where the bluff is so damn good that I don't only take in everyone else, I completely take in myself as well, which is how, when we're in this state of double bluff, we're honestly convinced that whatever we're saying is true really is true. We've bluffed ourselves. And so the next kind of question which we might ask is, well, why would we do this? Why would we need to do this tremendous stunt, really, which is to project this immense bluff that we completely fall for ourselves? Why would we need to do that? and what provides the motivation or the impetus for this extraordinary act of ours. And the answer, going back to what I started off by talking about, is of course terror, ontological terror, pure fear. And that fear comes out of uncertainty. So uncertainty means that I'm uncertain. I'm uncertain about everything, not just a few things, not just about the world, but also about myself. I'm uncertain about the whole damn everything, the whole damn thing, the whole damn everything. So if you want to get a flavour of what this feels like, we can think about this kind of thing which happens sometimes when we wake up. Maybe we've been travelling and we're in a different place every night, and we wake up one morning and we don't know where we are. For that moment, as we wake up, it's as if we're searching in our heads for that, where am I? And normally it's there straight away. We don't even notice ourselves locating ourselves. It's just there straight away because we're always there. But sometimes you get this disorientation in space, and it's like, for that second, we really don't know where we are. We could be anywhere, and it's a very particular type of a feeling. It's like pure disorientation. It doesn't usually last that long, but while it does last, it's quite remarkable. It's kind of like we don't exist in a location, and then the penny drops, usually, and then, oh yeah, it comes back to us. So that's one type of uncertainty with regard to where we are. So we could extend that back a bit, and so we could imagine that instead of not knowing, along with not knowing where I am, I also have absolutely no clue as to who I am. So, as usual, we could say, for the sake of the argument, that when we wake up, we quickly reach for our identity, and it's instantaneously there because it just is there. Usually when we wake up, we know who we are. Oh yeah, I'm me. That's okay then. But suppose I'm reaching out for this identity and there's nothing there, and I'm groping. So in this process of groping for an identity that isn't there, there is uncertainty, obviously. There's disorientation. But this isn't disorientation as a kind of a fault or error, or some kind of aberration of the mechanism of the brain, which is how we'd like to think of it. This is true. This is actually the truth. We haven't got all our ducks in a row. We haven't got all our fictions lined up. We haven't got our narrative in place. So for that moment when we're reaching for that ontological security, that's the truth. That's the real situation. So it's not that's the error. It's everything else. It's our everyday life when we do imagine that we know where we are and who we are. So if we could just make the little thought experiment of remembering a kind of when that might have happened to us, that type of disorientation, and just thinking, well, what would it be like if I didn't know who I was either? And what would it be like if this state of not knowing who I am and where I am persisted? Like for a few seconds, it's kind of okay, because before we get a chance to really think about it, everything clicks into place. So it's not so terrifying. It's weird, but it's not so terrifying. But all we need to do is just to imagine, well, what would that be like if it's like 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, and it still doesn't click in? What the hell would that be like? And then we can appreciate that, yeah, maybe I'd freak out. I don't know who I am. I'm freaking out. And so that is the fear that comes when we confront or relate to radical uncertainty. And that is also what's called ontological terror. Now, as I've said, we're normally super inclined to write that off as it's an aberration. It doesn't really matter. Don't worry about it. It doesn't matter. That's just your brain being funny, or it's just having a funny turn, a funny moment. But as I keep emphasizing, it isn't just an aberration. It isn't a funny moment. That is actually reality, which we don't normally encounter at all because we don't like to encounter it. We're not up for it. Is that reality? No thanks. No thank you. I'll pass on that one if you don't mind. I'll have something else instead. So, because it is reality, we can imagine. So, if we could imagine some hypothetical starting off point, and it's not necessary to kind of think of this, it happens at such a time and such a time, but just hypothetically, that our response to this terror, because the terror is so great, is not to stay in the terror. That's the basic response to all terror, is not to stay in it, because that's the nature of terror. So what we do is we bluff that we do know where we are and who we are. Oh yeah, I know. And the impetus that's gone into it is huge. It's like a denial bluff. It's like massive. The energy that's gone to it is huge. All of my resources, everything I've got has gone into this bluff. And I believe it myself, and that's the double bluff. And everyone I meet's also got the double bluff going, and we support each other in the double bluff. It's kind of like a universal bluff. And the bluff works. But underneath it all, we don't know. And it is all just a bluff. And to try to explain to anybody at all, to try and explain to them that what they're experiencing is their own bluff of knowing who they are and what they're doing and what things are, it's going to be remarkably unsuccessful. We're so deeply convinced. And yet, even though we seem to have put this ontological terror to bed, we haven't really. It's still there. And no matter how convinced we are, there is a level on which we do know about it, and there is a sense in which everything we do, in a very, very real sense, everything we do is determined by a need not to experience it. So because everything we do and think and our whole rationale, our whole theory of things is really only there because of our infinite unwillingness to experience ontological terror, we can say that the ontological terror manifests itself in everything we do. Everything we do is an avoidance of the ontological terror. So everything is determined not by anything else. There's no freedom in this at all. We're doing what we have to do in order to not be aware of the radical uncertainty at the core of our existence. Oh, if we were to go along with this a bit and see where it leads, what we'd find is that the scenario as I've just painted it makes it very, very easy to understand the mental health disorders, both the psychotic and the neurotic ones. Understand them in a clear and elegant way, not in the kind of ridiculous way which we do understand them. But this particular type of way of looking at mental health disorders is something that nobody wants to know about. Absolutely nobody. But it is very interesting. Okay, thanks for watching.